Picture this. Your organization just got hacked. You're in incident response, the alarms are literally sounding, your team is scrambling, and you finally found the malware. It's sophisticated. But before you do anything else, before you touch another keyboard, you have to answer one absolutely crucial question. Who did this? Was it a nation-state trying to steal your most highly guarded trade secrets? Or was it just some bored teenager who ran a tool they found on a random internet forum? Knowing who's behind that screen, it's not just trivia, it's everything. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're decoding the threat landscape to understand exactly who is attacking you.
Because honestly, answering that one single question changes absolutely everything about how you defend your network. Your incident response plan, your timeline, your defense strategy, and critically, your security budget. They all depend entirely on knowing who attacked you. A lot of people just assume all hackers are exactly the same. But they're not. Treating all hackers the same is literally the difference between preparing for a petty smash-and-grab theft and preparing for a highly organized multi-million-dollar heist. If you don't know who's targeting you, you are flying completely blind. So here's how we're going to break it down today. 1. Why threat actors matter. 2. Nation-states. 3. Organized cybercrime. 4. Insiders and hacktivists. 5. Script kiddies. And finally, 6. Identifying your attacker.
Okay, let's dive into part 1, why threat actors matter. Treating all hackers the same is a massive security failure. Let's say you're spending $5 million on security, but you're mostly just threatened by script kiddies. Well, you are vastly overfunded. But if you're spending that exact same $5 million and you're actively targeted by nation-states, you are dangerously underfunded. Look at the extreme contrast here. It all comes down to motivation, resources, and persistence. A nation-state actor is motivated by espionage, military advantage, or political disruption. They basically have an unlimited budget, access to zero-day exploits, those secret vulnerabilities nobody else even knows exist, and their ultimate goal is to stay inside your network, completely undetected, for years. Contrast that with a script kiddie. They're motivated by fame, learning, or, honestly, just plain boredom. They use free public tools, and their tactic is a quick smash and grab. They take what they can get, and they bounce. These are two completely different threats that require two completely different defense strategies.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates exactly what's at stake, the real-world financial damage. The average data breach costs roughly $4.5 million. But that number, it varies wildly depending on the actor. A nation-state breach, that averages over $50 million in damages, mostly from intellectual property theft and massive disruption. Organized crime will cost you somewhere between $5 and $20 million. An insider threat, over $15 million. This proves exactly why your security budget simply has to be tightly aligned with the specific threat actor targeting your specific industry.
Moving on to part 2, nation-states, the top-tier threats.
Let's talk about the true apex predators of the cyber landscape, nation-state APTs. That stands for Advanced Persistent Threats. These are cyber operations conducted by or on behalf of a government. And what makes them so terrifying is that government backing. It means budget is simply not a constraint for them. They can hire the absolute best talent in the world and custom create their own exploits. They aren't trying to make a quick buck. No, they're hunting for intellectual property, gathering critical intelligence, or looking to completely disrupt critical infrastructure.
So how do they actually operate? Very, very methodically. They'll spend absolute weeks just in Phase 1, reconnaissance, learning every single thing about your network. Then Phase 2, initial access. This is often through highly targeted spear phishing or a supply chain compromise. Phase 3, they establish a foothold, usually with malware that survives reboots. Phase 4, escalation and lateral movement. This is where they move through your network like ghosts, dumping credentials, mapping everything out. Phase 5, they achieve their objective and steal the data. And finally, Phase 6, persistence. They leave redundant backdoors everywhere so they can come back anytime they want. And the honest truth here, you can't strictly prevent a nation-state APT. Your goal against them is aggressive detection. You have to find them quickly and kick them out fast.
All right, let's pick up the pace for part 3, organized cybercrime, the profit engine.
If nation-states are the apex predators, this next group represents the ruthless, highly efficient business moguls of the hacking world. We're not talking about lone wolves in a dark basement here. Organized cybercrime groups are literal criminal enterprises. They operate with CEO-level structures, highly specialized roles, think developers, operators, money launderers. They operate like legitimate businesses. Some even have quality control, dispute resolution on dark web forums, published price lists, and yes, actual customer support to help you buy the Bitcoin needed to pay their ransom, which, ironically, might respond faster than your own internet provider.
Their one and only motive is fast, sustainable financial profit.
Just look at this staggering number, $34 billion. Let that sink in. That was the global damage caused by ransomware in 2023 alone. What's really interesting here is that while nation-states get all those flashy spy thriller headlines, organized cybercrime groups are actually responsible for significantly more overall financial damage. They are, without a doubt, the primary threat most organizations face today.
Because they're businesses, they have highly diversified income streams. Let's just run through them quickly. They use ransomware, demanding anywhere from $250,000 to $5 million on average. They use business email compromise. That's when they impersonate an executive to trick your accounting department into wiring funds, which, by the way, steals $5 billion annually. They steal and sell credentials on the dark web. They rent out botnets, and they commit payment fraud. Now, their defining characteristic? Extreme speed. Unlike the slow, quiet persistence of a nation-state, cybercriminals move incredibly fast. Sometimes a group can go from the initial compromise of your network to a full-blown ransomware encryption demand in just 48 hours. They don't have time for stealth. They just want your money right now.
Which brings us to part 4, insiders and hacktivists. Let's pivot for a second to two of the most unpredictable threats on the board. First, we have hacktivists. These are ideologically driven groups who use things like DDoS attacks or website defacement to expose corruption or protest policies. They want public attention, period. On the flip side, we have insider threats, and these are what keep security leaders wide awake at night. Why? Because an insider is someone who already has authorized access to your systems and chooses to abuse it. They completely bypass all your expensive perimeter firewalls because they literally hold the keys to the kingdom. This could be a malicious insider deliberately stealing IP to sell to a competitor. It could be a negligent insider who just carelessly left passwords exposed, or it could be a compromised insider whose account was hijacked without them knowing. Because they have legitimate access to the crown jewels, their dwell time is long, they are incredibly hard to detect, and when they do cause a breach, it averages a massive $15.4 million.
Part 5. Script Kiddies, aka the noise.
Now let's look at the absolute lowest tier of the threat hierarchy, affectionately known in the industry as the noise. Script kiddies are attackers who generally don't even really understand the tools they're using. They have very limited technical skills. Instead, they just download public exploits and tools and sort of point them at random IP addresses. They're motivated by ego, trying to prove they can hack, or sometimes just pure boredom. They have zero operational security, they don't bother covering their tracks, and their attacks are mostly just opportunistic. They're the ones constantly filling up your firewall logs with hundreds of failed login attempts.
But here's the good news. Because they lack sophistication, defending against them is actually straightforward. Basic cyber hygiene stops script kiddies dead in their tracks. We're talking about applying security patches immediately, changing those default passwords, using strong multi-factor authentication, and keeping your firewalls properly configured. Look, I'm just going to be totally honest with you here. If your organization is getting repeatedly compromised by script kiddies, your fundamental security hygiene is severely flawed.
And finally, Part 6, identifying your attacker.
All right, so we've profiled the main actors. Now let's transition from theory to the practical investigative stage. Say you've been hacked. How you actually figure out who did it? Well, security professionals use what are called indicators of compromise, or IOCs. They start by analyzing the malware for specific signatures that map back to known hacker groups. They look at the tactics, techniques, and procedures, often called TTPs. Did they use public tools or custom exploits? They look at the timeline. Were they inside for months like a nation-state or hours like a ransomware gang? They look at the scope and the sophistication. Now, perfect attribution is incredibly hard because attackers use VPNs and false flags to hide. But by combining all these indicators, incident response teams can make highly educated guesses that dictate exactly how to respond.
So, what can you do right now? Here are 3 actionable steps you can literally take this week to become threat actor aware. Step 1. Threat modeling. Ask yourself, who actually wants to attack us? Are you a defense contractor targeted by nation-states or a small retail business targeted by opportunistic script kiddies? Step 2. Subscribe to threat intelligence feeds so you learn what's happening specifically in your industry. Step 3. Response planning. Create specific incident response playbooks for different scenarios. You need to know exactly what you will do before you are attacked.
Ultimately, it all boils down to this fundamental truth of cybersecurity. Every attack has an attacker. Know your enemy, defend accordingly. Understanding exactly who that attacker is, their specific resources, their deep motivations, and their unique capabilities fundamentally changes how you must defend your organization. A nation-state will find you. Your goal is detection.
Organized crime is impatient. Your goal is prevention. Script kiddies are easy to stop. Your goal is simply denying access.
Which leaves us with one final, crucial question for you to take back to your team today. Don't just sit there and say your organization needs better security. Look at your industry, look at your data, and ask yourselves, what specific threat actors target us? Answer that, and you've taken the most important step in securing your future.
Welcome to The Explainer. When we actually look at the data on cybersecurity today, pretty shocking reality emerges. Organizations are very likely spending millions of dollars defending against the exact wrong attack. You might be buying AI-powered anomaly detection, hiring expensive threat hunters, and just assuming the absolute worst threats out there are highly complex. But by the end of our time together today, we're going to see why a real breach looks very, very different from what the industry is often selling us.
Check out this stat from the source material. It completely shifts the perspective. 77%. That is the percentage of successful breaches that actually utilized publicly known exploits or techniques. Just think about that for a second. The vast majority of attackers, they aren't using these secret, super sophisticated zero-day weapons built by nation-states. No, they're using methods and vulnerabilities from 2020 or even 2015. And why? Well, simply put, because they still work. And that right there illustrates the massive disconnect in modern defense strategies. We've got the illusion, the advanced firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and cutting-edge threat intelligence feeds that organizations just love to buy. But then we have the reality. In the real world, massive enterprise networks are being breached simply because someone clicks a pretty convincing phishing email, or a critical account doesn't have multi-factor authentication, or a really basic server is left unpatched. The hard truth is, advanced tools just cannot defend against predictable human behavior.
Section 1. The Cyber Kill Chain. Demystifying Attack Methodology.
So every successful breach actually follows a really specific pattern. It is not just a random string of events. Attackers use a methodology called the Cyber Kill Chain. This was originally developed by Lockheed Martin, and it has 7 distinct stages, starting way back at reconnaissance, ending with actions on objective. Now, the word kill is used here because each successful step moves the attacker closer to, well, killing your security. But here's the genuinely empowering part. You don't have to win at every single stage. If you break just one single link in this chain, you completely stop the attack dead in its tracks.
Let's look at how this actually begins. The very first stage, reconnaissance, happens before a single alert ever goes off on your network. Attackers are just quietly doing their homework, using open source intelligence, or OSINT. They're scrolling through LinkedIn to see who works there, checking job postings to guess what software you're using, and running technical scans to map out your infrastructure. It requires a lot of patience, and it can take weeks or even months of just completely silent observation.
To make this a bit more concrete, imagine an attacker spends 2 full months researching a financial services company. All that careful reconnaissance pays off when they find John Smith, the IT director, right there on LinkedIn. They figure out the company's email naming convention, and through some external scanning, they notice a public-facing domain running an outdated Citrix gateway and a vulnerable Apache server. So now they have both their human target and their technical target perfectly in their sights.
Taking all that incredibly careful research, the attacker moves right into the weaponization and delivery phases. They literally build a custom weapon designed specifically for their target. This could be an email that looks exactly like it's coming from internal finance, complete with a super relevant subject line like Q3 budget planning and a malicious PDF attached. And while sure, there are other methods out there like compromised USB drives, targeted email phishing remains the most common delivery method by an absolute mile. Why? Because humans are just predictably prone to clicking.
Next up is exploitation. And this is it, the exact critical moment the breach actually occurs. The weapon's been delivered, but it has to be triggered. So John Smith opens that email, totally assumes it's legitimate, and opens the PDF. The document asks him to enable macros for viewing, and, because he's in a rush, he just clicks yes. In that fraction of a second, a malicious script runs, and boom, the attacker now has unauthorized code execution on his machine. It really highlights how easily an innocent, split-second human action bypasses literally millions of dollars of perimeter security. Once the attacker is finally inside, they immediately need to ensure they don't lose that foothold. They install persistence mechanisms. We're talking about creating hidden scheduled tasks or modifying registry keys so their malware actually survives, even if John turns his computer off and reboots it tomorrow morning. After that, they begin lateral movement. Relying on stolen credentials or exploiting flat networks where every computer can just freely talk to every other computer, they hop from John's compromised machine straight to the servers, basically spreading through the organization's infrastructure like a virus.
Section 2. The detection gap and why expensive defenses fail.
So with modern organizations spending massive chunks of their IT budgets on security, you've got to wonder, why do these attacks still succeed? Well, the answer lies in how breaches are actually discovered. Get this, expensive internal security tools only catch a measly 3% of breaches. 3%! Meanwhile, a massive 50% of the time, the breach is discovered because an external party, like a threat intelligence firm or even law enforcement, literally knocks on your door to tell you you've been hacked. Your own expensive tools just aren't finding the attackers.
And because those internal tools failed to detect the intrusion, we end up with a truly terrifying statistic. 207 days. That is the average time to detection, which means attackers have over 6 months of totally unrestricted, unmonitored access to just explore your systems, exfiltrate your data, and set up ransomware before anyone even notices they are there. By the time they're actually detected, the attacker has almost always already achieved their objective. This happens because organizations are building what we can call Ferrari security without actually covering the basic mechanics. They're out there purchasing expensive SIEM software, deploying EDR agents absolutely everywhere, and hiring these elite threat hunting services. But the foundation underneath it all is rotting. There's no functional patch management process. They're missing basic multi-factor authentication, they have flat networks, and completely untested backups. It is exactly like buying a multi-million-dollar Ferrari, but just forgetting to put gas in it, or, buy insurance. Expensive tools absolutely cannot make up for fundamental security failures.
Section 3. The Autopsy, a real breach timeline.
Okay, let's ground all this theory in reality and perform a quick autopsy on a real-world incident. Day 1 through 14. The attacker is doing their quiet reconnaissance on our IT director, John Smith. Day 21. The delivery and exploitation phase happens. John opens that spoofed Q3 budget PDF, and Emotet malware is silently downloaded in the background. Now, for the next 40 days, the attacker just remains completely undetected, moving laterally and exfiltrating data. Then, day 61 hits. Lockbit ransomware drops across all systems. 10,000 files are encrypted, systems won't boot, and a $2 million ransom demand appears on the screen. It's total panic. And fast forward to day 180, the company is still dealing with massive legal and financial fallout.
Because the true cost of this incident goes way, way beyond the initial ransom. Honestly, that $2 million demand is practically a rounding error. Emergency incident response costs $2 million right out the gate. Defending lawsuits brings legal fees to $5 million. Mandatory customer notification and credit monitoring? Add another $13 million to the tab. Throw in regulatory fines and long-term reputational damage, and you are looking at an undeniable $45 million disaster. And the real tragedy here? This was an entirely preventable catastrophe if they had just managed to break one single link in that kill chain early on.
Section 4. Boring defenses that actually work.
Look, it is time to finally abandon the endless pursuit of these headline-grabbing security tools and just embrace the unglamorous, highly effective fundamentals to actually counter the kill chain. Stop their initial reconnaissance by strictly limiting public information. Block initial access with robust patch management and mandatory multi-factor authentication. Catch those attempts at persistence by deploying endpoint detection and response. Stop lateral movement by properly segmenting the network. And finally, limit their objective by maintaining secure, completely offline, and tested backups. Basic, boring hygiene beats advanced threats every single time. To make this really actionable, the source material provides a very direct 3-part roadmap. Step 1, this week, forcefully test an offline backup, audit your systems for any lingering default credentials, and verify your MFA status. Step 2, this month, assess your email filtering, finally tackle that critical patch backlog, and start drawing up a real network segmentation plan. And Step 3, this quarter, formally establish an incident response team and actually run a tabletop breach simulation with your executives. By breaking the overwhelming task of security down into these steps, it suddenly becomes totally manageable.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question to ponder. Are you going to implement these boring fundamentals, or will you just keep buying expensive tools and hoping for the best? The reality is, the attack methodology hasn't fundamentally changed in 15 years because, well, it simply hasn't needed to. Human error and basic misconfigurations are always going to be there to be exploited. But if you take the time to do the really tedious work, implementing patching, enforcing MFA, segmenting networks, and actively testing backups, you are instantly better defended than 80% of organizations out there.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're completely tearing down the illusion that cybersecurity is just this technical problem, firewalls, lines of code, and complex algorithms. The reality is actually far more fascinating and honestly a lot more terrifying. We're going to explore how our own psychology, the exact human traits that make us social, cooperative people, is actively being weaponized against us by cybercriminals. We're talking about social engineering. And by the end of this, you're going to see exactly how hackers are effortlessly bypassing billion-dollar security systems simply by hacking human nature. Listen to this quote for a second. I'm about to call someone at your company. I'm going to pretend to be from IT support. I'm going to tell them their account has been compromised and they need to reset their password immediately. I'm going to give them a link to click, they're going to click it, and I'm going to have their password. Wild, right? It's chillingly simple, but it perfectly highlights the reality of modern cyber threats. Attackers don't need to waste months hunting for complex, zero-day software exploits when they have a near 100% success rate just exploiting human nature instead. So, here's our roadmap for today. 1. Exploit the human, not code. 2. The hacker's psychological toolkit. 3. Real-world attack anatomy. 4. Why security training fails. And finally, 5. Building true security defenses. Let's get into it.
Okay, Section 1. Exploit the human, not code.
The absolute fundamental truth you've got to understand here is that humans simply haven't evolved for cybersecurity. We are biologically wired to trust authority and to be helpful. Those are the exact instincts that kept us alive for millennia. But man, they make us terrible at spotting digital deception. To give you an idea of the sheer scale of this, think about this number, 3.4 billion. That's how many phishing emails are fired off every single day. 3.4 billion attempts to totally bypass technology by tricking the human mind. Let's look at why these attacks are just so devastatingly effective. It all boils down to the attacker's advantage. Look, when a hacker writes a piece of malware, that code has specific signatures. Antivirus software and endpoint detection can spot those patterns and block them. But a social engineering attack, there is no digital signature. It's literally just a conversation. It's just words. There is no software patch you can download for human nature. Plus, these attacks are incredibly scalable. A hacker can blast out 10,000 emails with one click, or they can deeply research one specific target to find the exact right buttons to push. Moving right along to Section 2, the hacker's psychological toolkit. You know, professional social engineers basically operate like behavioral psychologists. They weaponize 7 core psychological principles to completely bypass your critical thinking. They use authority, knowing we're deeply hardwired to obey. They inject urgency to force snap reactive decisions. They leverage social proof, making you think everyone else in your department has already done this. They use scarcity to trigger FOMO, liking and similarity to build instant fake trust, reciprocity so you feel obligated to return a favor, and consistency, where they start with a tiny request before finally asking for your password. Honestly, the best hackers out there often understand these principles better than actual psychologists do. And this data right here brilliantly illustrates what happens when they start stacking these tactics. If an attacker uses authority alone, like pretending to be the director of security, research shows about a 20% compliance rate. If they just use urgency, saying your password expires in 2 hours, it's around 30%. But when they combine them, hi, I am the security director and your account will be permanently locked in 30 minutes. The threat becomes exponential. Compliance absolutely rockets to 65%. It's nearly unbeatable because it violently shoves you out of a calm analytical headspace and forces you into a panicked compliance state. Which brings us to Section 3, Real-World Attack Anatomy. Let's see what these tactics actually look like in the wild. First up, we've got the difference between mass phishing and spear phishing. Mass phishing is your basic shotgun approach. You blast out 10,000 generic emails, crossing your fingers that maybe 1% of people click the link. But spear phishing? That's the sniper rifle. It's incredibly targeted. The attacker spends hours on your LinkedIn. They study your company structure, they find out you're working on Q3 budgets right now, and then they spoof an email from your actual boss asking for a last-minute update. Because it's customized and completely expected, the success rate jumps to a massive 20 to 30%. Then we have the physical and phone techniques, starting with pretexting. This is where an attacker invents a completely false scenario to pull info out of you. Imagine you're at your desk and the phone rings. Hi, this is Tom from IT vendor support. I just need to verify your administrative credentials real quick for this system migration. It sounds totally normal, maybe even a little bored and perfectly legitimate. It immediately triggers our deep-seated desire to just be helpful. And without hanging up to verify the call, most people will just hand over the keys to the kingdom. Baiting and tailgating bring this deception right into the physical world. Baiting triggers irresistible curiosity. Picture an attacker dropping a USB drive clearly labeled salary information right in the company parking lot. Someone is absolutely going to pick that up and plug it in, and the exact second they do, malware is silently installed. Tailgating exploits our basic social politeness. An attacker dresses up like the cleaning crew, fills their hands with a bunch of heavy equipment, and simply asks an employee to hold the secure door open for them. Physical presence creates these incredibly powerful illusion of legitimacy, and our fear of being rude totally overrides our security training. Now watch how a pro strings this all together into a highly sophisticated attack timeline. Day 1, they make a simple pretexting phone call, maybe disguised as a harmless IT survey, just to map out your network. Day 2, armed with that info, they send a highly targeted baiting email. Day 3, they use everything they've learned to physically tailgate right into your building. And by day 4, they are plugging in and installing malware directly on your servers. Every single successful stage completely breaks down resistance and makes the next step incredibly easy. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, oh, my team is way too smart to fall for this, I really need you to hear this. Victims are not stupid. Back in 2013, a social engineer successfully phished highly trained employees at both Facebook and Google. How? Simply by pretending to be from Apple IT. Because the employees used Macs, the emails looked totally professional, they invoked authority, and they manufactured urgency. This attacker extracted critical credentials from literally some of the best engineers on the planet. It just proves that absolutely nobody is immune to well-crafted psychological manipulation.
All right, Section 4, why security training fails.
For years, companies have basically relied on this annual check-the-box security training. But here is why that system is fundamentally broken. When you're sitting there taking security training, you're engaging your conscious mind. You're taking in slow, analytical, intellectual knowledge in a perfectly calm state. Don't click suspicious links, right? But real social engineering attacks, they don't give a damn about your conscious mind. They target your subconscious. By injecting authority, urgency, and fear, they trigger your fast, reactive, emotional state. By the time your conscious brain even realizes something might be off, your finger has already clicked the mouse.
So, organizations run this generic training and think, great, we're safe. In reality, it just creates a massive Dunning-Kruger effect. Employees just become overconfident. Look at the hard data here. Right after one of these training sessions, the average phishing click rate is still hovering around 30%. 6 months later, it barely even moves, down to 25%. After a full year, you're sitting stubbornly at 23%. This annual intellectual training provides pretty much zero defense against emotional attacks.
So let's talk about how we actually fix this. Section 5, building true security defenses. If we can't just train human nature out of our employees, we absolutely must build systems that protect them. First things first, we have to replace that boring annual training with continuous active testing. We're talking progressive, monthly phishing simulations. When you safely expose your team to fake phishing emails and give them immediate, real-time feedback without punishing them, the results are actually incredible. Instead of being stuck in the 20s, the initial click rate of 25% drops to 8% in 6 months and plummets to a crazy 3% after a year. You aren't just teaching them facts, you're building a real behavioral reflex.
But hey, behavior is really only half the battle. We have to build technical and cultural safety nets around the human. On the technical side, turning on multi-factor authentication reduces the impact of credential theft by a staggering 99%. Why? Because a stolen password is literally useless to a hacker without that second factor. Implementing email authentication, like DMARC, completely stops attackers from spoofing your CEO's email address. Culturally, you've got to create an environment that actively rewards people for reporting suspicious things rather than punishing them for making a mistake. And crucially, implement policies that literally mandate slowing down, requiring independent verification for any urgent wire transfer or credential request.
So what does this look like for you on Monday morning? Here's your action plan. This week, do a reality check. Honestly, ask your IT team if MFA is actually at 100% and if DMARC is properly configured. This month, implement one high-impact, low-friction control. Turn on MFA for all remote access, or finally set up your first safe phishing simulation. This quarter, begin that structural culture change. Start normalizing the sharing of near misses and make sure leadership is actually modeling the exact same security verification behaviors they expect from the rest of the team. I want to leave you all with this final thought. Social engineering is always going to be the weakest link because it hacks our biology. You can't put a firewall around human emotion. You can't install antivirus for our psychology. You simply cannot patch human nature. But By implementing robust technical controls, running continuous simulations, and building a culture that demands we slow down on urgent decisions, you make these attacks brutally difficult to actually pull off. The real question you have to ask yourself is this: are you building a system that expects perfection from your humans, or are you building a system that actually protects them? Take that back to your teams.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to shine a light on what are, without a doubt, the most mysterious, highly prized, and genuinely dangerous threats in the entire cybersecurity landscape. We're talking about zero-day vulnerabilities. These are the secret cyber weapons that live entirely in the shadows, and honestly, understanding how they work is absolutely crucial for anyone who's serious about security. Let's get right into it.
So I want you to think about something for a second. What do you think is the absolute most valuable secret in hacking? Well, it's the knowledge that somewhere out there, right this very second, an attacker is actively exploiting a system, and the vendor who built that software has absolutely no idea it's even happening. The attackers found a flaw, they haven't told a soul, and they have exactly zero intention of doing so.
Okay, let's dive into this. A zero-day vulnerability is, at its core, a structural security flaw in software or hardware that the manufacturer just doesn't know exists. And because they don't know it's there, there is literally no patch available to fix it. The name itself, zero day, it comes from the fact that defenders have had exactly 0 days of warning to prepare before the attacks begin. For an attacker, this is the holy grail. It means they have completely unrestricted, totally undetected access.
To really grasp the sheer danger here, let's look at how the timelines compare. With known vulnerabilities, defenders actually get a head start, right? The vendor finds it, they announce a patch, organizations apply the fix, and boom, problem solved. But with a zero-day, the attacker completely owns the timeline. They find it first, they exploit it in the wild, and it could be days, or honestly even years, before the vendor finally stumbles upon the truth, which then sets off this massive, panicked scramble for organizations globally to patch their systems.
All right, Section 1, the 6-phase life cycle, the birth of a cyber weapon.
So, every zero-day goes through a very specific lifespan. Step 1 is discovery. Someone probes a boundary and finds a hidden crack in the code. Then Step 2 is exploitation, where the attacker uses it in absolute secrecy, maybe for corporate espionage or a highly targeted strike. Step 3 is disclosure, that dreaded moment the secret finally gets out to the vendor or the public. Then we hit Step 4, patch development, which is just a frantic race against the clock to build a fix. Step 5 is the propagation of the exploit. This is when the exploit code gets published and suddenly thousands of everyday criminals have access to it, while organizations are still scrambling to patch. And finally, Step 6, market depreciation. Once the patch is widely deployed, the zero-day loses its magic, its value drops to 0, and the attackers simply move on to the next one.
Moving on to Section 2, the vulnerability window, the vendor's nightmare.
30 to 90 days. Let that sink in for a minute. According to industry data, this is the average amount of time it takes a vendor to develop and release a patch once they become aware of a critical vulnerability. So, for a minimum of 1 to 3 months, an organization is essentially a sitting duck. You're completely exposed to a threat you now know about, but mathematically just cannot fix yet.
Now you might be wondering, why can't they just patch it in a day? Well, vendors aren't just dragging their feet here. They have to run a really grueling gauntlet. First, they have to validate that the vulnerability actually exists and hunt down the root cause. Then comes the actual coding of the fix, followed by intense QA and regression testing across 1 million different operating systems. They also have to manage risk acceptance, because think about it, releasing a rushed patch that ends up bricking millions of systems on a Friday afternoon is arguably way worse than the vulnerability itself. Finally, they have to coordinate the release, often waiting for scheduled cycles like Patch Tuesday, and document the whole shebang for their users.
Let's look at Section 3, the secret zero-day market, a shadow economy.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is just how much money we're talking about. Because these vulnerabilities are so incredibly powerful, an entire shadow economy has popped up around them. We are not talking about spare change here. A low-severity information disclosure bug, that might fetch you 5 to 10 grand. But as you move up to critical 0 days, like a remote code execution that lets an attacker completely escape a mobile operating system sandbox on iOS or Android, nation-states and specialized brokers are willing to shell out anywhere from $500,000 to over $2 million for that premium, weaponized code. It is mind-blowing.
And if you're wondering, why on earth would a cybercriminal pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for a few lines of code? Well, just look at this number.
4,900%. That is the terrifying return on investment for a typical high-level ransomware operation. If a criminal buys a zero-day for $100,000, uses it to encrypt 100 companies, and extorts a conservative average of, say, $5 million in ransom, well, that's just ruthless simple math. The astronomical profit completely justifies the massive upfront expense.
Which brings us to Section 4, World-Changing Cyberweapons, Historical Impacts. These aren't just theoretical threats, they are world-altering events.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how fast the dominoes can fall. Let's take Eternal Blue, a massive Windows vulnerability. Prior to 2016, the NSA was using this as a closely guarded nation-state secret. Then, in April 2017, a hacker group called the Shadow Brokers leaked the exploit to the public. Within literally 1 month, the WannaCry ransomware weaponized that exact exploit, infecting over 200,000 computers globally in just 72 hours and causing billions in damages. It shows how terrifyingly fast a zero-day goes from a spy agency's private toolkit to a global catastrophe.
Of course, we can't talk about historical zero-days without mentioning Stuxnet. Discovered around 2010, this malware was aimed directly at Iranian nuclear facilities. And it didn't just use one zero-day. It chained at least 4 of them together into one massive weapon. Stuxnet made history as the very first known cyberweapon to cross the digital divide and cause actual physical destruction, literally making centrifuges spin out of control until they destroyed themselves. It proved unequivocally that nation-states will hold on to and use zero-day vulnerabilities for years without anyone ever noticing.
All right, Section 5, What You Actually Fear, the ultimate twist. Everything we just talked about is about to get put into a pretty jarring new context.
So, we have nation-state espionage, multi-million-dollar dark web markets, and global ransomware meltdowns. It sounds exactly like a Hollywood spy thriller, right? But here's the ultimate twist. Despite all the terrifying headlines and the massive sums of money changing hands in the shadows, 99% of actual organizational breaches happen using known vulnerabilities. Only about 1% utilize true zero-days. The vast, vast majority of the time, threat actors don't need a $2 million zero-day to hack into your network. They just use an old, known vulnerability that an organization simply forgot or neglected to patch.
Organizations defend against zero-days, but get breached by known vulnerabilities. There is a massive disconnect in the industry right now. Security teams are absolutely terrified of these elite, invisible nation-state threats. And as a result of that fear, they completely neglect the mundane, basic, routine reality of patch management.
Which leaves us with this final question to consider. Are you chasing ghosts in the shadows while leaving your front door wide open? Zero-days are fascinating. They're incredibly dangerous, and they absolutely drive the bleeding edge of cyber warfare. But for most of us, true security doesn't start with fighting ghosts. It starts with fixing the broken locks we already know about.
Welcome, everyone, to this explainer. If you've ever wondered exactly how cyber threats went from being, minor annoyances to globally destructive forces, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're unpacking the foundational threat intelligence of the digital world. We're going to systematically trace the 35-year evolution of malicious software, moving straight from the defender's view right into the adversary's arsenal, because the reality is, you simply cannot defend against what you don't fully understand.
Okay, let's dive into this. $10 million. Back in 1988, that was the total estimated damage caused by the Morris worm, an incident that a lot of folks consider patient zero for major malware events. It crashed roughly 6,000 computers. And honestly, the wildest part, the creator, who was a graduate student at the time, claimed it was entirely an accident.
But contrast that 1988 accident with the staggering $4 billion in damages caused by the WannaCry ransomware attack in 2017. In a matter of hours, it infected 200,000 systems across 150 countries. It was so completely devastating that National Health Service hospitals in the UK literally had to turn patients away. So the stakes have fundamentally transformed, going from an accidental computer crash into massive, real-world life-and-death consequences.
Which really brings us to the pivotal question we have to answer today. How did the adversary evolve so quickly in just 35 years? Attackers have had 3.5 decades to learn, to evolve, and to aggressively weaponize their code. While modern tools look absolutely nothing like they did in the early days, the foundational logic is still there. We are locked in a continuous, high-stakes, evolutionary arms race.
To deconstruct this massive topic today, we're covering 6 types of malware, the evolution of evasion, the big 3 families, the 8-stage kill chain, and finally, defenses that actually work.
Section 1. 6 types of malware, the foundational taxonomy.
To defend a network effectively, you first got to know what tools the adversary is keeping in their toolkit. Consider the rootkit. Now, what's really interesting here is what makes it so insidious compared to traditional malware. It's designed specifically to hide. It operates at the deepest operating system level, often right inside the kernel, sharing the exact same privilege level as the OS itself. This means it renders malicious processes, files, and network connections completely invisible to standard security tools. The system will literally tell you it's totally clean, all while the attacker operates freely right underneath it all.
Next up is spyware, which is built for silent surveillance. This software steals your credentials, captures screenshots, and can even activate your microphone. A prime example from our source material is Pegasus, a commercial spyware heavily used against journalists. What makes modern spyware like Pegasus so incredibly terrifying is the concept of a zero-click infection. It requires absolutely zero human action to deploy and remains completely invisible on the device.
So looking at the complete taxonomy, we have the virus, which attaches to files and requires a human to actually run it. The worm, which is self-propagating and spreads automatically, just like WannaCry did. The Trojan, disguising itself as legitimate software to deliver a payload. The rootkit for deep invisibility. Ransomware, which locks up your data until you pay up. And spyware for silent data theft. But keep in mind, the most sophisticated attacks today don't just use one of these. They combine several of them simultaneously to create a really devastating effect.
Section 2. The evolution of evasion. Evading the traps.
Detection really is the ultimate evolutionary pressure. Simply put, every time defenders build a better trap, attackers immediately build a better escape, and this brilliantly illustrates that dynamic. Traditional signature-based antivirus relies on a static database of known byte patterns, but it totally fails if the threat is brand new. In response, attackers developed polymorphic and metamorphic code. Polymorphic malware actually changes its appearance, its byte pattern, every single time it replicates, even though the core function stays the same. Metamorphic code goes a massive step further and actively rewrites its own coding engine between infections, leaving practically no consistent DNA whatsoever. Against this, traditional signature AV is essentially worthless.
But wait, because the evasion arms race just hit hyperspeed. From 2023 onward, attackers shifted heavily to generative AI. AI is now writing unique malware variants on demand, churning out thousands of functionally identical but structurally unique samples every single day. The sheer volume makes it completely impossible for human analysts or signature databases to ever keep up.
Section 3. The Big Three Families: Ransomware, Banking Trojans, and Info Stealers.
These three categories absolutely dominate today's billion-dollar commercial cybercrime landscape. Let's look at the fascinating timeline of Emotet, which is perhaps the most notorious banking Trojan out there. It started in 2014 simply to intercept banking sessions, but by 2016, it had mutated into a resilient modular platform. So it wasn't just stealing credentials anymore, it was installing other malware and forming massive botnets. Even when global law enforcement managed to take it down in 2021, the code and the operators just adapted, and it made a massive return in 2022. It really shows the sheer persistence of these families.
Then we have ransomware, which transformed into a massive corporate threat through two very modern tactics. First is double extortion. Attackers now exfiltrate your sensitive data before they encrypt your systems. So even if you have perfect backups, you still have to pay, or they'll publish your customer data online. And the impact is staggering. Just look at NotPetya causing an estimated $10 billion in global damages, or the Change Healthcare attack in 2024, where $22 million was paid outright to the attackers.
The second modern tactic driving this is RAS, or Ransomware-as-a-Service. The structure of this proves just how corporate the cyber underworld has become. It's literally a franchise model. Highly skilled developers write the complex malware, but they don't deploy it themselves. Instead, they lease it out to affiliates who do the actual hacking, and then they split the profits. Typically, the affiliate who breaks in takes a shocking 70% of the ransom, while the developer takes a 30% cut. It is operated exactly like a legitimate, highly profitable, and hugely scalable business.
Section 4. The 8-stage kill chain. Deconstructing the attack.
Now, before step 1 even begins, it's vital to remember that the delivery mechanism for 90% of these infections is just a simple phishing email. Once clicked, we enter a simplified MITRE ATTC framework. Stage 1 is execution, where the user opens the malicious file. Stage 2 is privilege escalation, where the malware exploits a vulnerability to elevate itself to admin rights. Armed with those rights, it moves to Stage 3, defense evasion, where it literally turns off your antivirus and deletes its own tracks.
Finally, stage 4 is credential access, where it dumps the system memory to steal passwords. So at this point, the malware has a solid foothold and has entirely stripped away your initial defenses. Let's move to the second half and see how this builds into a total compromise. Stage 5 is lateral movement. The malware uses those stolen credentials to spread across your network. Stage 6 is persistence, altering the registry so the malware survives even if you try to reboot the computer. Stage 7 is establishing command and control, basically phoning home to the attacker for instructions. Which finally leads us to Stage 8, the objective. This is where the ransomware is actually deployed, or the data is exfiltrated.
Section 5. Defenses that actually work. Managing the threat.
The most crucial takeaway from understanding that kill chain is this. If you can stop the attacker at stage 1 or 2, you absolutely guarantee that stages 7 and 8 never happen. But to do that, we have to upgrade our tools. Traditional AV suffers from severe blind spots because it relies on signature matching, which, as we discussed, fails against mutating or AI-written code. EDR, endpoint detection and response, however, acts as a highly advanced security camera for your computer. It records the full process tree, every single network connection, and every file change. When malware runs, EDR gives defenders the complete behavioral timeline to hunt it down and stop it.
Which leaves us with the definitive modern defense playbook. Security professionals absolutely must adopt these strategies to survive right now. You need behavioral detection to watch what the code actually does, not what it looks like. You need EDR deployed everywhere. You have to utilize threat intelligence to share active indicators of compromise globally. And most importantly, you need a zero-trust architecture. You must assume your network is already compromised and constantly verify every single access request so the malware cannot move laterally.
But the most crucial defense metric actually involves human behavior. Remember how 90% of malware is delivered via phishing? Well, if an organization conducts user training and drops their initial phishing click rate from 25% down to just 4%, they reduce their successful infection rate by a massive 84%. The best technical defenses in the world mean absolutely nothing if a user simply opens the front door and lets them in.
Which leads us to this incredibly sobering conclusion drawn directly from our source material. Humans are the hardest thing to patch. It's so true, right? Even with zero-trust architecture, global threat intelligence feeds, and advanced behavioral EDR, human decision-making remains the biggest, most consistently exploitable vulnerability in absolutely any network.
Because the hard truth of it all is that malware evolves faster than defense. It's no longer a problem you can permanently solve, it's a condition you have to manage. The goal is no longer pure prevention, but rather speed of detection and containment. So I'll leave you with this question to seriously consider for your own networks. Is your organization truly capable of detecting these evolving, polymorphic, and AI-driven threats faster than the damage can spread?
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty terrifying reality. You know that software you confidently use every single day to run your operations? Well, what if it's already working against you? We're talking about a massive, fundamental shift in how cyber threats actually operate today and why all those traditional ways of protecting your data are suddenly failing us.
Okay, I want you to imagine this. You've got a trusted vendor, right? Someone you've used for years. You click Update on their software without a second thought. But what happens if they get hacked? Almost overnight, thousands of companies, including yours, are automatically compromised. You literally didn't do a single thing wrong, but suddenly, your systems are wide open.
So, what exactly is a supply chain attack? Basically, it's when a bad actor compromises a vendor, a software provider, or even just a critical piece of code, all to attack the downstream customers. Hackers finally realized something. It is way too hard to break down your heavily guarded front door. So instead, they just hide inside the deliveries you already signed for. It's the ultimate modern-day Trojan horse.
Section 1. The Economics of Scale. Let's look at why attackers change their tactics.
The real reason this is happening absolutely everywhere right now comes down to pure economics. Think about a traditional direct attack. A hacker targets one organization, spends hours or maybe days, and gets a one-to-one return on investment. But a supply chain attack? They target a single vendor, stay completely hidden for months, and hit thousands of organizations all at exactly the same time. That is a 1,000x or more ROI. I mean, why hack one company when you can hack a supplier and breach thousands in one go? The payoff is just too huge to ignore.
Here is the exact playbook they use. Step 1, find a weak vendor. Step 2, compromise their systems. Step 3, push the malware out to the customers.
The result is wild. They completely bypass your downstream network defenses, your expensive firewalls, your intrusion detection, your fancy EDRs. They are totally useless here. Why? Because the malicious payload is walking right through the front door, perfectly disguised as a legitimate, cryptographically signed software update.
Section 2, Vectors and Dependencies. How deep does this vulnerability actually go?
Here's the thing. Attackers aren't just targeting the final software you buy off the shelf. They are poisoning the well at every single stage. They're putting backdoors into hardware, infiltrating cloud service providers, compromising open-source software libraries, and get this, even hacking the very build tools and compilers that developers use to write the code in the first place. The attack surface is insanely vast.
And this creates what we call the dependency domino effect. Think about the apps on your phone right now. Your application relies on a web framework. That framework relies on a logging library, which needs a compression library, which relies on a cryptography library that might literally be maintained by one random guy in Nebraska. A modern app can have over 1,000 of these hidden transitive dependencies. So just one compromised library way down at level 4 cascades up and completely destroys your entire application's security.
The data on this is really concerning. 80% of supply chain attacks happen at level 2 or level 3 dependencies. Now, these are layers most organizations don't even know exist. Companies typically only audit their direct level 1 vendors, and that leaves this massive, highly exploitable gap that hackers are just taking full advantage of. Because let's face it, you simply cannot secure what you cannot see.
Section 3, Case Study, SolarWinds. Let's look at the most significant supply chain attack in history. Tracing the timeline of this attack reveals a chilling 9-month hidden window. The attackers originally gained entry back in October 2019. They moved incredibly slowly and patiently, eventually modifying the build process by February 2020 and then releasing the Malicious Sunburst update in March. They operated silently inside thousands of networks, handpicking high-value targets before a totally different security company accidentally stumbled upon the breach in December. 9 months of total invisibility. That is wild.
And to put the scale of this into perspective, 18,000. That single malicious software update was downloaded by over 18,000 customers. It instantly compromised government agencies like the U.S. Treasury and Homeland Security, major Fortune 500 tech companies, and critical infrastructure all over the globe.
The financial impact of this one single breach, it topped out at an estimated $5 billion. With a B. And a lot of that was actually due to immense data theft and secondary ransomware deployments. Because once the initial attackers were inside, other criminal groups essentially piggybacked on that SolarWinds access to plant ransomware and multiply the devastation.
But listen, SolarWinds was not some rare anomaly. We are seeing a very clear global pattern of compromise here. From consumer tools like CCleaner hitting 2.3 million users back in 2017 to the massive MoveIt file transfer vulnerability in 2023, we saw 3CX's phone system get weaponized, the Xcode Ghost attack that modified Apple dev tools over in China, and the continuous everyday poisoning of open source packages in NPM and PyPI. Honestly, it feels like every single month brings a brand new discovery of a massive supply chain failure.
Section 4, The Unsolvable Puzzle. Why defense is nearly impossible.
So why is this so incredibly hard to stop? Well, the average organization uses hundreds of different vendors, and their security setups are all over the place. Large vendors usually have decent practices, so they're relatively trustworthy. But medium and small vendors, they might have limited or even zero security teams. And open source projects, which are everywhere, are often volunteer-run with minimal funding, making them extremely high risk. You simply do not have the time or resources to audit all of them. It's a logistical nightmare.
The grim reality of all this is staring us right in the face. Recently, 62% of organizations experience a supply chain attack. When the supply chain is involved, the average cost of a breach jumps to over $20 million. But the stat that really keeps security folks up at night? 70% of organizations cannot detect compromised vendor updates. Our current defense mechanisms just fail flat out because they're fundamentally built to trust signed legitimate software.
We are totally trapped in this trust paradox. Let's look at the options. Option A, you use software and accept the very real risk of a supply chain attack. Or Option B, you don't use software and your business literally ceases to function. There's no middle ground. We are essentially forced to implicitly trust thousands of strangers just to keep the lights on.
So I want to leave you with this one final, pretty unsettling thought. If SolarWinds, a massive, highly security-aware IT management company, got compromised so completely,
Who won't? In a world where trust itself has become the ultimate weapon, is anyone truly safe from a supply chain attack? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the systems you trust.